The aliens took a hushed step back as the hulking form of the Earthling lumbered through the hatch, head ducking low to avoid scraping on the top of the entryway as thunderous footsteps echoed through the hall. It paused for a moment before reaching a broad gloved paw up to retract the golden-shielded visor, revealing a broad snout, black nose and beady eyes, and a conspicuous set of silver implants forming a loose halo around its head and at the base of its chin. The creature spoke, a low growl that the translator below its snout quickly parsed into the rich tapestry of clicks and hums that formed the Vidine language. Greetings from Earth. Humanity had sought a meeting with the Vidine for some time now, concerned about the actions they were taking with their mining and harvesting craft. Something about disruption of what should be preserved. Several other alien species had concurred with humanity, saying that Vidine were destroying what they called the natural beauty of their sector of the nebula. But the Vidine had no concept or need for this beauty. They had studied it, studied the idea of this beauty at least, and seen that it was simply an unnecessary trait, one that they were personally glad they had never evolved. But they also were aware that to remain in good standing with the intergalactic community, they should at least make an effort to hear out those making the argument that something of value was being lost. And so the planet of Earth and her associated worlds was chosen as the ambassadors to make this case. Specifically, the Vidane were told to expect a pair of Earthlings at this meeting summit. However, this being did not resemble the Earthlings that they had seen in most of their holovids of the diplomatic proceedings. The creature growled again, the voice the smoothly translated voice from the device on its throat, saying, "A salmon of thanks for you in meeting with us." The Vidane looked to each other, unsure what a salmon was as the creature continued. "We are glad to finally meet with you in person at last." "We?" The Vidane at the frontis of the group asked, an elder priest who had been the most willing to hear out the argument for this beauty, although he was still highly skeptical. "I see only one of you." "Oh, sorry, just lost in Oslo's shadow here," came another voice, and out popped another Earthling. This was much slimmer and resembled what they had seen in the holovids. It was also a biped, but hairless. A smashed and flattened minuscule snout on the end of its face, and hairless save for a copious mop of golden curls spilling forth from the visor. "I am Ivana," she said by way of introduction, "and this is Oslo." The other Earthling bowed lowly, before standing and noticing the disbelief at the dichotomy between the Earthling morphologies. With almost a hint of amusement in the translated tone, he spoke. "Oslo understands your confusion. Ivana is a human, but Oslo is a different species from the same planet, called a bear." He gestured a broad paw to the crown of metal devices, ringing the top of the skull. Oslo's species has been enhanced by humanity, given the ability to conceptualize and communicate, as well as control some basal hunger instincts, he said, grinning and bearing a mouthful of terrifying incisors and canines. "We are both here from the University of Moscow's College of Arts and Culture," said Ivana. "I am a professor there focusing on alien arts and creativity, and Oslo here is the dean of the college." The bear chuckled, an ominous sound that still caused some of the Vidane to instinctively take a step backwards in safety. "Oslo was once a professor too, years ago," he intoned, "but Oslo comes now because we seek to help you understand why we and others see this nebula as a precious thing, to be preserved however possible." The Vidane ambassadors grumbled and glowered, clearly suspecting this would be another attempt to try to explain this concept of beauty to them. The Vidane were originally an aquatic species millions of years ago, and a common sentiment was that this was like explaining water to a fish, saying that there was some sort of unseen and mysterious property all around them that they were told they needed to understand and appreciate, despite not seeing whatever it was that everyone else must have been seen. "Very well," said the head ambassador, not even trying to keep the annoyance out of their tone. "Proceed with whatever you seek to say. You have 2 hours. Then we will proceed with the scheduled harvest of this arm of the nebula." Ivaba gave the bear a rueful shrug, and the looming creature gave her a simple smile in response, saying in a reassuring low tone, "Oslo has taught more belligerent students than this in a shorter class time than we have been given. Have faith." Turning to address the delegates, he said, To begin, Oslo wishes to show you some pieces of human art. The Vedan's eyes were more of highly nuanced eye spots, not capable of truly moving around without moving their head, but had they had a more structurally spherical eyeball, they would have rolled them at the comment. Taking their silence as agreement, the bear lumbered over to the large shipping crate the two had brought into the conference room with them. He unlatched the top and pried it open with a practiced claw, before selecting and pulling out the first piece with a tinkling of carefully dulled claws against ceramic. Then he placed the urinal on the table in front of them. This is a reproduction of a very famous earth art piece. It is called Fountain. The aliens cocked their heads, activated their visual scanners. Blue lights swept over the ceramic urinal before a series of flashing lights were seen on the side of their head as the structure was identified and correlated against a database of human cultural information that was available on the galactic HoloNet. One by one, each of their heads snapped up with surprising confusion. But this is a defecation receptacle, one of them said. Used for venting liquid waste. This is not a fountain. Smiling slightly, Oslo said, "Nevertheless, this art piece is called Fountain." One of the Vedan was sputtering with frustration. "But it's not a fountain?" He pulled up a series of images and projected them from the holographic emitter at the end of the table. On it were a series of fountains and water displays from across Earth and some of the more well-known settled worlds. "This is the fountain?" he said almost frantically. "It emits clean water into the air, again to satisfy what you species say is a pleasing fashion." "That," they said, gesturing to the urinal sitting forlornly on the table, "that is simply a defecation receptacle. It's oriented perpendicular to the norm, but were it mounted to the wall, it would look like every other receptacle." "It is not a fountain?" said Oslo, the hum adding an extra bass rumble as he said, "Perhaps I was mistaken. Should I move on to a different art piece instead?" The Vedane threw up their hands in frustration, but there was a round of nodded agreements. The inconsistency of the art piece and its structure against its name causing much consternation amongst the alien delegates. "I will now show you a simple printed image," said the bear, pulling out a canvas with a simple illustration and some text painted on it. "This is titled The Treachery of Images. I'll give you a moment to review it and allow your identification and translation protocols to interpret it." The image was simply that of a small curved tube carved from wood and some swirling and looping earth text. But as the translations came through their devices, the Vedan again began trilling in frustration. "That is an image of a human recreational device called a pipe, but then below it is text that parses as 'this is not a pipe.' Yet it shows a pipe," said another. "Is the artist lying to the viewer, intentionally misleading them? It could be a cruel prank or an attempt to cause a viewer to disbelieve their own senses." Oslo nodded approvingly, saying, "That is certainly one interpretation, but in this case the author is being truthful." He gestured with a claw to the canvas. "This is indeed not a pipe. It is merely an image of a pipe as transcribed onto a flat media. A true pipe is a three-dimensional and functional object, and this is merely a facsimile, a part of the whole and yet not the whole." The Vedan nodded, mostly in confusion, but with a degree of understanding that had not been there before. "Shall Oslo continue?" the bear asked the ambassadors, and there was another round of nodding in a sense. Less frustration than before, but still filled with uncertainty. The bear pulled forth another canvas from the crate, and Ivana smiled approvingly, noticing that he had not skipped around at all, and in fact was following what must have been his exact lesson plan to present to the aliens. "This a piece called Number 1, or Lavender Mist, by a human artist from the 20th century called Jackson Pollock. What do you think of when you see this piece?" The image was a cacophony of splatters of paint. Black, white, orange, and certainly parts that were a pale lavender or pastel, as well as many other colors the aliens could perceive. They ran their visual sensors over it, seeking to glean perhaps some hidden symbolism or meaning that would be plain and clear to an earthling that they were overlooking. But aggravatingly, the translation beeped negative. "It's just a mess of paint," said one. "It looks haphazard." "It looks accidental," said the other. "How do you know this was made by this Pollock earthling you speak of?" and not simply an industrial accident at a protective coatings manufacturer. There are details but no structure, no information given, just randomness and noise. Yet noise that was created deliberately, countered Oslo gently. Does it make a difference that the hand that created this created intentional randomness rather than incidental randomness? The Vidine looked at a loss. It is a difference, but what is the significance of the difference? They asked. Oslo chuckled again. That is a strong question, and not one that Oslo can answer for you. But related to that, he reached into the crate and pulled out a small carved brooch. It had a pin on the back. One of the Vidane scans indicated could be facilitated to attach to textiles without damage, and the carved icon was that of a bear itself, on all fours and with a mouth open in a roar. But the material was an intriguing one, a series of dozens upon dozens of layers of enamel, of all colors and thicknesses, some sparkling with hints of metallic glitter, others flat and non-reflective, resembling a layered sandstone, but vibrant with hues beyond anything seen in nature. This is a material known as Fordit, said Oslo, carefully turning the small piece of jewelry around in his claws. Fordit was indeed, as you said, a mere accident of an industrial protective coatings facility. Over half a century, the paint used to protect human personal transportation vehicles layered within the paint rooms. Each new color of vehicle reflected as a new layer caked onto the walls and surfaces within the painting rooms. The paint would be chipped away, revealing these layers, each speaking to a different period in time and a different taste and interest in whatever color humans sought to have their vehicles be that year. One of the Vidane looked at him curiously. Were these transport vehicles also for bears? Oslo chuckled and shook his head. No, we were not uplifted until sometime later. But it is still a phenomenon I appreciate and enjoy seeing. He turned back to the carved piece. Human artisans found this waste material, saved it from salvage it from where it would otherwise have been discarded. Using the same techniques one would use to carve a gemstone, they turned a piece of iridescent trash into something one would display proudly upon their breast. He passed it over to Ivana, who helped him carefully pin the brooch upon a pocket of his spacesuit as he turned the Vedni, apologetically saying, "One disadvantage of my species' claws is that our dexterity is somewhat lacking for very fine work such as that." The Vidine looked on, one of them saying, "It is an efficient use of recycled materials to be sure, but why would you expend effort to reclaim trash, especially for such a non-functional use?" Oslo nodded, but then said, "It is possible they felt that just because something was destined for discarding, that did not mean that should be its true fate." He gestured to the aliens. "This will be relevant in a moment, I assure you, but do the Vidane not reproduce in small litters?" The delegates looked at each other in confusion, but then nodded. "Yes, typically 3 to 6 pups per birthing." "Why do you ask?" "Is it commonplace for one of the pups, especially in larger litters, to be smaller, undernourished, and have a larger struggle to survive and be healthy in the first initial weeks? It is a phenomenon we have on Earth as well, with what we call a runt." The ambassadors looked at each other, but then nodded again slowly, saying, "Yes, but we call them the blessed proof." "Oh?" said Oslo with a tone of curiosity. "Why are they called that?" The priests lifted themselves up proudly, saying, "Because it provides the opportunity to prove that Vidine do not leave a life behind, that we raise and care for all of our offspring in such a way that ensures they have equal opportunities to survive and thrive as they mature." "And why is that important?" asked Oslo, leaning forward slightly as he pressed the question. "Why does a Vidine life matter so much?" The aliens were slightly taken aback by the questioning, but the bear had built enough rapport with their discussions thus far that they pushed past their initial hesitation and said vehemently, "Because there is an importance to Vidane lives, something that outweighs any preferences to shy away and conserve resources for just yourself." "Fascinating," said Oslo as he sat back. "Very fascinating. Well, in that case, one moment, I retrieve my next piece." The bear rummaged back in the crate before pulling forth a piece of carved and gold-leafed wood. The wood was cracked with age, but still in good condition, and the trio of alien delegates could see an image on it of a human mother, garbed in a flowing garment, pulled up partially over her head as she cuddled a small carved child. Behind the head of the child and the mother, both were sunbursts in gold leaf, radiating outwards from each, and causing the remaining details and carvings on the panel to shimmer as they caught the lights of the conference room. This is one of many depictions of a scene famous in human artistic history. However, I will refrain from telling you the name and ask you first what this art piece makes you feel. There was a moment of hesitation as the Vidine looked at the carving suspiciously, but they quickly softened, seeing the expression common across species of a mother's love for their child. One of the Vidines said, unprompted, "She carries and cares for her child, as my own clutch mother did for me when I was small." Without looking up, the other Vidine asked, "Earthling, what was this piece called again?" Oslo gently said, "This is one of many pieces depicting a similar scene, a scene typically referred to as Madonna and Child." There was a moment as the lights flashed on the HoloNet terminals for each of the aliens, and a slow gasp of realization from the first one that had spoken. "This is one of your primary religion's deities, but it depicts your deity as being cared for by a mortal human?" "That's about the summary of it," said Oslo, nodding in approval. "But this does not depict divine righteousness or commands," protested the priest. "All it depicts is love," said the first Vidane in a hushed tone. "This is the love of a mother for a child, no matter who that child may be." The bear said nothing but just smiled widely, as did Ivana beside him. "I think we're ready to move on to the final piece," said the bear. He pulled forth another piece, this time a glossy photograph. "This one is from Oslo's own private collection," he said with a hint of pride in his voice. In the picture was that of a frozen earth vista, piles of snow and ice heaped on either side of the center. Within it was a bear much like Oslo, except for a pure white coat curled at the center of the image. Also visible was a bear cub, similarly snuggled under the enormous arms of their parent. The bear and cub were surrounded by shallow pools of ice and meltwater, looking like loose ripples or waves radiating out from them, given the angle of the photograph, and giving the appearance of the bear and cub being a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples photographed in motion. There was another gasp of appreciation from the Vidane, one of them saying, "How did they manage to ask the bear to pose for this piece? I do not see signs of any sort of uplift or translational devices." Oslo chuckled again. "This was taken well before uplift. Unfortunately, humanity had developed and expanded unsustainably at first on our shared planet, and my sister species here were driven almost extinct. However, mistakes were corrected, habitat restored, and this was taken some decades after their population had been replenished to a healthy level." He pointed to the image with a claw. "This is a wild bear. No communication given or needed between them and the photographer. The photographer just simply had an eye for beauty and happenstance, and noticed that the sleeping bear and their cub were situated in an ideal spot." "You mean to say these ripples here were not intentional, or the results of any sort of industrial processes?" asked the most curious of the Vidane. The Vidane looked to each other and said, "Then what is it that humanity and the others see in the nebula that drives you all to such defense of it?" "Well," said Oslo, turning and giving a nod to Ivana as she went over to open the shutters of the conference room. "Why don't you tell me what you see?" The station, the conference room, had been initially on the edge of the nebula, but had purposefully been drifting to the part of the Vidane's holdings. There, visible through the window, was the collection of not quite newborn stars and tendrils and pillars of gas and light that had been the primary focus of the other species when they had first beseeched the Vidane. But now, looking upon it anew, the delegates could see the implied shape of a parent, head bowed in deference and with arms of brilliant gas spread wide, hugging a cradle of a half-dozen newborn stars. Ejected gas and streamers appearing like limbs, stretching and yawning, as if caught in a moment of wakefulness. "Do you see now why we have named this place Embrace?" The ambassadors nodded, a whistling trill quietly emanating from the foremost Vidane, a sound that their species used to express strong emotions and sorrow. "And to think this all would have been lost," said one. "But it is not lost, not yet," said the other firmly. It was the priest who immediately pulled up their communicator and shot off a message. The large mining rigs that had likewise surrounded the structure of the Embrace began to engage engines and fly away, and Ivana let out a held breath in relief. "My thanks for the valuable teachings, ere that is, Oslo," said the quietest of the ambassadors. "We will seek to engage and pass them on to others amongst our kind, in the hopes that they can one day understand the value in the treasures we didn't even know we had." With that, the ambassadors stood and bowed, dismissing themselves to the door. But as they reached it, one paused, turning back to the bear and asking, "If I may ask one last question?" Oslo inclined his head. "Please do. Of all the species on your planet, for Earth is very biodiverse from what we've seen, why did humanity uplift yours? It seems like there would have been hundreds, if not thousands, of other candidate species who could have been the focus of those efforts." The Veden hesitated, shirking back slightly as it said, "My apologies if that was too forward." Oslo shook his head, smiling reassuringly. No, it's quite all right." He looked out the window to the warm glow of the stars of the embrace, relishing its beauty in person for the first time. They just saw we had something in common.